It's been a great honor for TD to sponsor this Work Well, Live Well series and today's session. And I think we've all come away learning a lot from it. And it's been great for us to be a part of it. I want to start by acknowledging that the city of Thunder Bay resides in the Robertson Superior Treaty and has been built on the traditional lands of the Ojibwe people of Fort William First Nation. We recognize the significant contributions of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples to our heritage, social, cultural, spiritual, and economic wealth. Today's session will be interactive. We are encouraged to keep our cameras on, microphones muted, and to use the chat to provide responses. There will also be a time for us to unmute and share our insights to some key questions. Our presenter today is Cynthia Green. Cynthia's career spans over 30 years. For the last decade, she has cultivated relationships while building her own business, working in and with a multitude of workplaces, facilitating workshops, coaching, and inspiring participants to make lasting changes. Her personal belief system and life experience were the catalyst for self-employment. Her passion for continuous learning, extensive training in resilience, mindfulness, physical and mental wellness are the foundation of her work today. She is committed to an active lifestyle, spending time in nature, and helping individuals and organizations move toward their vision while achieving balance. With that said, I will turn things over to Cynthia.
Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you to everyone who has been on this journey with us. We were chatting just before we opened up the seminar, and this has been so wonderful for me to be able to share some of my stories, to be able to connect with you, because these last 2 years have been difficult. And I think we've all been stretched in many ways. We've been pulled. We felt like we've been battered and thrown around in a windstorm, and just rubbing our eyes, wondering where we are. It's the Wizard of Oz, Dorothy in Kansas, and where am I? So today we're going to be talking about the resilience at work wheel. And it's the foundation of what I've been presenting these last 7 months. And when we think of, resilience and how we can define it, we may all feel like our capacity, we've been at our limit. But I think we've also been able to recognize that our capacity has been there, our ability to manage the everyday stresses of work and life. We've been healthy, we've been unhealthy, and we've rebounded. We've found ways to recharge. We've learned about boundaries and how important they are, as well as how difficult it is to implement them. And I think on any journey, it's important that we stop and we reflect on what is it that we've learned? What is it that we've learned, and how have we grown through these times? What were the setbacks, and how can we use what we learned and what happened in those setbacks to prepare us for future challenges? Because what we know, if anything, what we know is that adversity is what makes us strong, and it's what life is filled of. So when we look at this wheel and we look at the different markers, these are called our sustainability factors. And we've talked about how we can live more authentically. And, sometimes we need to give ourselves permission to take that first step, or we need to give ourselves permission to pause and reflect and ask ourselves, what are my values? Is it even something that I've stopped and thought about before? What are my strengths? And then when we think of, emotional awareness and regulation, we're seeing in numbers the effect of how emotions and that interplay with our mental health and awareness. And then for those of us that are lucky enough to have found our calling, perhaps we're stopping and asking ourselves, do I still have that sense of purpose? And as we go into this new hybrid workspace, what does it mean to belong to a tribe? What does it mean to belong, to have that group of people that get me, that know me? And then when we perhaps, start to wonder if there's something else out there, aligning our work with our core values and our beliefs is what is so important so that we can have that energy to be able to go forward. And then when we look at our perspective, it's really easy, and especially when we talked about burnout, it's really easy to hook into the cynicism and to hook into the negativity that abounds out there. But how can we push that pause button? How can we stop and ask ourselves, how else can I see this? And, remaining optimistic, having that door open for just that crack in the window sometimes, and allowing the light to shine in. And we talked in 2 of our sessions about stress. We know about different types of stress, but our brain doesn't know how to manage it when we just tell ourselves that we're stressed. So we need to have tools both at home and at work so that we don't let that accumulation of stress get to us. And then when we think about feedback and how hard it is to hear feedback, and again, they're not separate, they're all intertwined. And perhaps when we're receiving feedback, when we're having one of those difficult conversations, our tendency may want to be to lash out. But how can we hold the space and be able to take that in and take what's relevant and put the rest of it up on the shelf so that we can take it down when we need it? So we're going to be going through, and there are going to be questions on these slides, and I'm going to ask you, if you're so inclined, if you're courageous enough to be able to answer those questions, because when we speak from our authentic self, what it does is it opens the door so that others can show up as their authentic self. So as you go through these, and when you look at these 7 different foundational steps, how would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5? How would the people that you work with or live with rate you on a scale of 1 to 5? And perhaps that's the next conversation that we need to have so that we can have a well-rounded view. So I'm going to ask the question before I pull up the next slide, and feel free to use the chat function. We'll open up the room at the very end so that we can bring our voices in. But what is it that you've learned these last 7 months? What's one thing that you have learned in the last 7 months? Thank you. That balance is key. And balance is something that we go through, going from one extreme to the other, isn't it? And we, it's like we all come up to our ledge. And about boundaries, the importance, thank you of scheduling time in your calendar for yourself, saying no when it doesn't align with your overall vision of balance. And that importance, thank you, of taking time out for reflection. Thank you. So living authentically. So for others, it's about managing emotional energy. It's a daily practice. Isn't that the truth? So what are your values? When you look at this screen, when you look at this little box here, what's the first one that comes to you? And how do you maintain those values under pressure? What have you accomplished that demonstrates your values through action? And then the other important question is, what values do you need to adopt to be more resilient? Because what we know about resilience is that our values are our personal priorities that they represent what's important to us in our lives. And we know that a misalignment in values can impact our resilience. And then we also know the importance of knowing what our strengths are. And when we can engage in our strengths, when we can use our strengths both at home and in the rest of our life, then we're more energized. And we find that life is just that much more satisfying. And there are so many different assessments that you can do, because those questions of who am I now that I've changed and the world has changed is a really important question. So is your gift strategic? Are your gifts more relational? Are you, able to influence people through your wisdom, through your knowledge? Or are you the person that gets things done? So how can you design your life to better use them? And stopping and asking at the end of the day, when we're feeling like we did a really good job, when we carried that ball over the finish line, or when we made the Masters was just on, when we made that birdie putt or whatever they call it, when you were at your best, what were the strengths that I was using? And again, that whole point of being authentic and showing up as our authentic selves. And sometimes our authentic self needs to express those emotions. And we know that emotional reactivity can impact how others perceive us. And it also can impact our own sense of resilience. So asking those questions, of what triggers an emotional overreaction in us, and how can we respond to triggers earlier? Because we know that those, that niggly feeling shows up here. And if we wait until it's up here and it's full blown, then what happens? It causes the tsunami of emotions in ourselves and in other people. Now, the question I'm going to ask you, because some of these are it's too vulnerable to share them in a public space like this, but I'm going to ask the question, the last one, and I'm going to ask you to respond to that in the chat function. What calming strategies do you practice at work? That deep breathing, and it's so important. Our breath tells us everything about what's going on. So we've got a lot of comments on that, about stepping away from something before responding. Now, and even as we're sitting here now, just pay attention, bring your awareness to your breath. Is it shallow? Are you holding on? And just allowing that next inhale to go all of the way down, and then exhaling all of the way out, and staying with the breath the entire time. Being away for 5 weeks, it was, and especially the last couple of days with travel stress, I recognized last night as I was, going back to my normal routines and my normal practices, that I had been breathing very shallow again. And it was, I couldn't feel the breath go down in between my rib cage. And once I invited that to come back again and I was able to feel it, it was like, oh, that's what I was missing. So it's not about beating ourselves up, but perhaps we need to engage in a couple of extra calming strategies. Not over scheduling ourselves. When something new comes up, recognizing, that perhaps we need to be a little bit braver. We need to use all of our courage today, because with the trust and the faith that we'll have more courage tomorrow. And perhaps we need to start really small, because it can feel really overwhelming to try and take everything on at once. especially when we're going to be going into meetings, when we're going to be engaging with people that we haven't engaged with for a long time. And then back to the authenticity, and using your strengths, knowing your strengths, knowing what your values are, because we can't make a wrong decision when we're coming from our values. And I think every day we need to remember to do something that we enjoy. And when we do something that we enjoy, I know we've talked a lot about fun and laughter and happiness. And then the other thing is to not overcommit, to have those boundaries, to recognize that this new phase that we're in, whatever we're calling it, is going to take more emotion. So the sustainability factor number 2 is finding your calling. And that sense of belonging can enhance our resilience. We all need to feel a part of something. And perhaps, since we've been on technology so much, we've forgotten the why it is we do what we do. And I think that we're all of service. We're all called to be of service. We're all here to help other people. So reconnecting to that why you do what you do. And this speaks again to our values, the values of the organization that you work in, the values of the community that you live in, and talking about our why. A lot of times we pull back or we don't have these conversations. But as we go forward, it's really important that we connect on a personal level with our colleagues. And this is where a lot of times people leave because there's not that connection. And even when we think of inappropriate behaviors and how it's really easy to do things on technology that we wouldn't do in person. So, if you have that meaningful purpose at work, how can you better connect it to your everyday activities? And then stopping and asking ourselves, what would you like to say 10 years from now about how you've contributed through work or through this time in our lives? How will you answer that question? Because we're going to be talking about this for a long, long time. What were you called to do? How were you stretched in that calling? And our tendency to want to minimize or to minimize or negate how difficult this was and how we still showed up. So, and perhaps we need to stop and ask ourselves, do I still believe in what I do? And how does that belief either enhance or how does it detract from my resilience in work or at life? So our next sustainability factor is maintaining perspective. So what is it that we've learned that we have control over? So there's your question for the chat function. What have you learned that you have control over? We'll start with that one first. What do you have control over? Your time doesn't always feel like that, though, does it? My own actions, the way that I react, my reaction to things, emotions, mental state. So mood, emotions, so there's a theme there, isn't there? So what thinking traps are you prone to? We talked about this back in the beginning of our session where we talked about, awfulizing and catastrophizing. the polarizing, and aren't we seeing a lot of that these days? The all or nothing thinking, the blaming, wanting to point the fingers, shoulding, they should behave this way, I should have done this. And recognizing that we all have those thinking traps. And some of them we're more loyal to than others. But let's use the chat function again. And how do you overcome them? What are some of the strategies that you use when you notice that you're caught up in that stinking thinking, those cognitive distortions? What is it that you do to get out of that or out of them? Look for a more positive way of looking at it. Take a break, go for a walk. Thank you. Listen to music, do something else, distract ourselves. And then, and this is so important. Thank you. Check in with my support network. And then ask myself, looking at things from an external perspective, like a high level overview, or asking, what would my higher self say about this? Yeah, that's a good one as well. Turn off social media. Get in our car and go for a drive, listen to music, have a sing-along. Exactly. And the other one that was, and again, we used all of these tools in different ways, but writing it out. And that whole process of writing it out and asking ourselves questions, is it true? Am I sure? How else can I look at this? So the next important question is, what are you holding on to that you can't influence? What are you hanging on to that's creating tension in you? When you think of walking around with a glass of water, or a bottle of water, at the beginning, it's not that heavy, but you carry it around all day and your arm is aching. So that question over and over and over again, what am I holding on to that I have no control over? And where is that tension showing up in my body? Because what happens in the mind has a response in the body. And what happens in the body has a response in the mind. Good one. Trying to change others. Now, being on vacation for 5 weeks, being away for 5 weeks, as you know, I wasn't on vacation. I was still working. And at the airport with all of the airport stress, I recognized, in times of stress, I try to manage not only my emotions, but my husband's emotions too. And I've been at this a long time. And there was, travel stress, it's travel stress. And, I've had to do a lot of reflection. I've had to do a lot of going over that and asking myself, what did that teach me? We were both out of our comfort zones, and even travel has changed. So again and again and again, tension shows up in our bodies before our mind even has an opportunity to figure out what it is. So giving ourselves that space, giving ourselves an opportunity, it's like we need to go out and rake the garden, pull out the weeds. So which of these 4 types of stress is the hardest for you? Situational stress, when we talked about change and we recognize that when we have no control and we have no time to adapt to something, what happens is that all of our energy is gone or is used trying to deal with that situation. And then as we start to unravel, what we need to do is remember, reclaim those things that we used to do that brought us that sense of dealing with our stress. But if we let it go on too long, those cognitive distortions will come in and say, well, what's the point? You've just lost everything. Is it anticipatory stress? where we're awfulizing and catastrophizing, or we're worrying about what the future, and perhaps we've lost the faith in ourselves that we are we are resilient. And then time stressors, managing our calendar and the guilt that we feel in taking time off, or how when we set a boundary and we tell people that we're going to take this time off, and then as it gets closer and closer, we let those little voices take control of the microphone and we cancel what it was that we really needed to do for ourselves. And then burnout happens from chronic stress, where our mind, our body, and our energy needs time to reset. So what are your reset and renew strategies? What are the de-stressing techniques that you do? Or let's ask the question in a different way. What are the de-stressing techniques that you need to engage in more, both at work and at home? What's that thing that you know you should do that you don't do yet? Thank you. Turn off notification. It's hard. And when we talk about habit change, it's hard to change habits, but recognizing, once we change those habits, it's not like it's a one and done. They're going to come back. So time away from technology, time with friends, exercise, and fun. That fun one is profound, isn't it? Clearly and openly communicating thoughts and feelings. Being able to just shut the computer off and put it away, put it in the safe, and give someone else the combination for it. So what else do we need to do? Now, what's that? And you don't have to put this in the chat function, but what's that one thing in our lives? And for every one of us, there's that one thing that we just keep on stuffing down because we're not ready to face it yet. And when we, bring something out into the open, then it's not controlling us anymore. And this is where perhaps we need to find a coach, find a mentor. Back to the point about, our support network, perhaps we need to access our support network. So what about sustainability factor number 5, interacting cooperatively? Connection and care and support builds resilience. Feeling valued as a person, it's like the emotional glue that holds us together. So where is it that you can seek feedback? And I think the more we can ask for feedback, and it can be something as simple as, what did I do well? What did you like? What can I get better at? And the more we do that ourselves, then again, it opens the door for others, our children, the people that we live with. And who do we go to for advice? Who do we go to for support? And then because we're such reciprocal human beings, who can you reach out to offer support this week? Again, technology has changed the way that we work together. But the thing about being able to ask for support, about being able to ask for help, is that the more we can do it and the more comfortable we can be, it helps to build resistance. But what is it that prevents you from asking for the assistance that you need? Do we prejudge and tell ourselves, well, that person's really busy and I don't want to be a burden? Recognizing as well that that there's more than one way of doing things. And if we let it go for too long, what happens is that the thing that we didn't want to happen, we didn't want to be a burden to someone else, is that ends up what happens. That's what ends up happening. Finding my groove again. So what is it that you need feedback on? Who is that best person that can provide objective and valuable feedback for you? I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it was, talking about those that are on the front lines, or those that, are out there, and how it's so easy for people to take swipes at you on social media, or tweeting or posting, and how that can it can rock our self-esteem. It can rock our foundation of who we believe we are by just one person's negative comments. So how do we find ways to still be out there, but at the same time, not let those harsh or unkind words rob our sense of who we are? So who's that person, in the back of your mind that you thought, they seem to be struggling these last days? And you see, the thing that I've learned is that when I'm feeling really, really bad, when I'm engaged in a little bit of self-pity, or, I've seemed to have lost my way, reaching out and talking to someone else. I don't have to tell them about what it is that I'm going through, but just holding the space and listening to what someone else is going through, boy, it can really change my perspective of things. And we've all experienced so many losses and so many hardships on top of COVID these last 2 years. So how do you stay healthy? So how do you invest in your physical and mental energy? So question for the chat function: what are the early warnings of overload in your team? What are the early warning signs of overload in your family, or of yourself, in yourself? Irritability. Yeah, loss of patience with others, wanting to run away from it all. Oh, I can relate to that one. Yeah, and I run away in many different ways in my world. Like in my mind, it's, leaving relationships, leaving jobs, running away and living off the grid. But I think I've shared this with you before. When I start separating the furniture in my head, I know that's when it's time to have a conversation with my husband about the way that things are going or how I'm feeling. Yeah. And those of us that have that perfectionistic gene, whether we call it being a neat freak or, overly organized, yeah, when we feel, and sometimes I think that, our outer world, we just want it to be perfect so that we can feel like our inner world is as well. And perhaps that's when we need to focus on our inner world and not put so much emphasis on the outer. So back to, and there's a theme in all of this about what are our switch off activities? And how do we make them permanent habits? It's not just about letting go of technology. There are other things. What is our relationship with being able to relax? We talked about the 7 different types of rest. How can we make those permanent habits? Because this next while is going to take a different focus, a different energy. So it's not just about what we eat and how much sleep we're getting. So who's in your network? And how can we rebuild those networks? Again, because people have changed. So when we think of, how we build our networks, Oh, having that supportive network again builds our resilience because we feel and we know that we're not alone. So what support do you need? And there are many different boxes that we can put this in, but stopping and doing an assessment of what gaps exist in my support network and how can they be addressed? And then asking, what would support look like? And again, that reciprocal part of us, who can we reach out to and offer support to this week? Who's that person? As when I'm going to share my story, the person that comes to mind right away, one of my friends buried her husband while I was away on vacation. And I kept in contact with texting, and I've even heard in my mind, oh, she's probably really busy, or, now that the celebration of life is over, perhaps, perhaps she's really in the grief of it now. And I went, whoa, all of those stories I'm telling myself, it's time to pick up the phone and make that phone call. So, when we put ourselves into, or we put people into one category or another, I think that the recognition that we've come to is that how we are all connected in so many different ways. And as we go forward, as we march forward, I think that the foundation of how we change our life is by starting immediately. Not waiting until tomorrow, because tomorrow doesn't always come. And then perhaps we need to do it with an air of flamboyance. Perhaps we need to announce to the world that this is the new me. And then recognizing that there are no exceptions.